February 19th, 1945. Iwo Jima. The volcanic sand still smouldered where naval shells had torn through Japanese defensive positions carved into the island's black rock. Private First Class Richard Clare, of the 1st Battalion, 21st Marines, crouched behind a shattered pillbox, watching something that would have seemed impossible to Japanese defenders just months earlier. His squad's flamethrower operator, Corporal James Hendricks, approached a concrete bunker that had withstood 3 days of naval bombardment and 2 direct artillery strikes. The aperture, barely 8 inches wide, faced downslope toward the beach, where thousands of Marines had died in the first 72 hours. Hendricks moved with practiced efficiency. 40 feet from the bunker, he opened the valve. The igniter sparked. What emerged was not fire as soldiers had understood it for millennia, but something fundamentally different. A pressurized stream of napalm-jellied gasoline that clung to everything it touched roared from the M2 flamethrower's nozzle at 40 gallons per minute. The jet entered the bunker aperture with surgical precision. 45 seconds later, the position went silent. 7 Japanese soldiers who had survived 3 days of the heaviest naval bombardment in Pacific War history were dead. Clare would write in his diary that night, "The Japs built fortifications we couldn't crack with bombs or shells." Then Hendricks walked up with a weapon that weighs 70 pounds and ended it in less than a minute. "I don't think they ever imagined we'd have something like this." He was right. They hadn't. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Japanese defensive doctrine in 1944 and early 1945 represented the culmination of 3 years of bitter tactical evolution. After catastrophic losses in early Pacific battles where Japanese forces had attempted to meet American firepower with frontal assaults and banzai charges, Imperial Japanese Army strategists had adopted a radically different approach. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander of Iwo Jima's garrison, articulated this transformation in his defensive plans distributed to all officers in September 1944. "We will abandon the water's edge," Kuribayashi wrote. "We will not seek death through futile charges. We will construct positions of such strength that American firepower becomes meaningless. Each position will require American infantry to pay in blood for every meter. This island has 16 square miles. We will make those 16 miles cost 50,000 American casualties." The mathematics of this doctrine seemed sound. Japanese engineers had studied American tactics exhaustively. They understood that American operations depended on overwhelming firepower superiority naval guns that could continuities loaf, demolish any surface structure, artillery that could saturate square kilometers, aircraft that could deliver bombs with increasing precision. The solution was to go underground. Iwo Jima's volcanic rock, despite being difficult to excavate, could be shaped into positions that no amount of conventional bombardment could destroy. Between June 1944 and February 1945, 11,000 Japanese soldiers and laborers transformed Iwo Jima into what American intelligence would later call the most formidable defensive complex encountered in the Pacific War. They carved 11 miles of tunnels through solid rock. They constructed 650 pillboxes, bunkers, and blockhouses using reinforced concrete with walls up to 5 feet thick. They positioned these defenses in depth, mutually supporting positions where each bunker could provide covering fire for its neighbors. Major Yoshitaka Hori, who served on Kuribayashi's staff, documented the defense philosophy in reports that would be captured after the battle. "American naval guns fire shells weighing up to 1 ton, he wrote in November 1944. "We have witnessed these shells create craters 30 feet deep, but if our positions are beneath 10 feet of rock and 5 feet of concrete, such shells only shower us with dust. The Americans will bombard for days, even weeks. We will wait beneath the earth. When their infantry advances, we emerge. They die. Their artillery responds, and we shelter again. This cycle continues until their casualties become politically intolerable." The defensive positions reflected sophisticated military engineering. Firing ports were designed to be nearly invisible from frontal approaches, often just 8 to 12 inches wide, angled to provide maximum coverage while minimizing exposure. Multiple entry points connected by tunnels meant that even if Americans identified and attacked one entrance, defenders could escape through others, or reoccupy the same fighting position after American troops moved past. Ventilation shafts allowed positions to remain habitable during extended bombardment. Underground storage chambers held ammunition, water, and rice sufficient for months of fighting. What Japanese planners understood was that conventional weapons lost effectiveness against such fortifications. Artillery shells exploding on the surface did nothing to men sheltered beneath meters of volcanic rock. Naval bombardment, however impressive in tonnage delivered, could not penetrate properly constructed positions. Even direct bomb hits from aircraft might collapse surface structures but leave subterranean chambers intact. American infantry would arrive at these positions having already exhausted their supporting fires. Then the real killing would begin. Major General Harry Schmidt, commanding 5th Amphibious Corps at Iwo Jima, received intelligence assessments describing these defenses in January 1945. His staff estimated that conventional tactics infantry advances, supported by artillery and naval gunfire, would require 3 months to secure the island. Casualties were projected at 15,000. These estimates assumed the Americans would develop effective methods for reducing fortified positions. What the intelligence reports could not predict was how the M2 flamethrower would render Japanese defensive doctrine obsolete in precisely the manner American planners needed. The M2 flamethrower had evolved from earlier designs that Japanese forces had already encountered with limited concern. The M1 model, deployed in 1943, carried 4 gallons of fuel in twin cylinders worn on the operator's back. It could fire for approximately 10 seconds at ranges reaching 40 feet. Japanese defenders had adapted quickly. They targeted flamethrower operators specifically, recognizing the tanks on their backs. They designed fighting positions with narrow apertures that made accurate flame projection difficult. They relied on the weapon's short range and duration, knowing that operators had to expose themselves dangerously close to deliver effective fire. The M2 model, introduced in mid-1944, represented fundamental technological advancement. Its 4-gallon capacity remained unchanged, but pressure systems increased range to 50 feet. More significantly, American chemical warfare specialists had perfected napalm, a mixture of napalm aluminum salts that thickened gasoline into a gel. This gel adhered to surfaces instead of splashing or dissipating. It burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It consumed oxygen so rapidly that even soldiers not directly burned would suffocate in enclosed spaces. It was persistent, continuing to burn for minutes rather than seconds. Chemical Warfare Service reports from autumn 1944 described napalm's characteristics with clinical precision. Upon contact with flame, the jellied fuel ignites and maintains combustion through its entire mass. Unlike liquid gasoline, which may flow away from target surfaces or be extinguished by water, napalm clings to vertical surfaces and continues burning. When projected into enclosed spaces, napalm consumes available oxygen, creating immediate asphyxiation conditions for occupants. Secondary effects include toxic gas generation and heat sufficient to detonate stored ammunition. Japanese intelligence had obtained limited information about flamethrower developments. Prisoner interrogations from Peleliu in September 1944 mentioned American troops using improved flame weapons. But the reports were fragmentary and contradictory. Some captured Americans described flamethrowers as unchanged from earlier models. Others mentioned improved fuel without technical details. Japanese analysts, lacking access to chemical composition data or tactical employment reports, concluded that American flamethrowers represented incremental improvements rather than revolutionary capability. This assessment was reinforced by Japanese combat experience. At Peleliu, where American forces had encountered similar cave and bunker defenses, fighting had lasted 2 months. American casualties exceeded 10,000. Flamethrowers had been employed, but Japanese positions ultimately fell to time-consuming combinations of demolitions, close assault, and sustained bombardment. From the Japanese perspective, the lesson was clear. Properly constructed fortifications could withstand American weapons. Victory went to whoever demonstrated greater willingness to absorb casualties and continue fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Takeichi Nishi, commanding Japanese tank forces on Iwo Jima, wrote to his family in January 1945, with confidence that reflected broader Japanese certainty. The Americans will come with their usual methods: bombardment, then infantry with tanks and artillery. We have prepared positions they cannot destroy with such weapons. Our concrete can withstand their largest shells. Our tunnels protect us from their bombs. When their infantry approaches, we will emerge and kill them. Then we retreat to shelter while they bombard empty rock. This cycle will continue until they abandon the assault or exhaust themselves. Either outcome serves our purposes. The confidence extended beyond engineering calculations to cultural assumptions. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spirit, the willingness to endure suffering and die rather than surrender. American forces, Japanese planners believed, lacked this spiritual fortitude. Americans relied on material superiority and technological solutions. When faced with casualties that technology could not prevent, American morale would collapse. The defensive positions on Iwo Jima were designed to exploit precisely this perceived American weakness. What Japanese commanders did not understand was that the M2 flamethrower, combined with napalm and new tactical employment methods, had created a weapons system that bypassed their entire defensive philosophy. American Marine Corps had been developing specialized doctrine for flame weapon employment throughout 1944. Flamethrower operators were no longer individual soldiers acting independently. They formed the core of combined arms teams specifically designed to reduce fortified positions. The standard flame assault team consisted of 4 riflemen, providing suppressive fire, 1 Browning automatic rifle gunner to engage apertures and suppress counterfire, 1 demolitions man with satchel charges, and the flamethrower operator. The team approached under covering fire from supporting units. Riflemen and the BAR gunner kept defenders away from firing ports. The demolition man might first attack with explosives to stun defenders or create additional openings. Then, the flamethrower operator approached to effective range, typically 30 to 40 feet, and delivered sustained fire directly into the position's aperture. Against conventional bunkers with sandbags or wooden reinforcement, the napalm would simply burn through barriers and incinerate defenders. Against concrete positions with narrow firing ports, the jet entered the aperture and filled the interior space. Defenders faced impossible choices: remain inside and die from burns, asphyxiation, or ammunition explosions triggered by heat, or attempt to escape through exits where American riflemen waited. The typical Japanese bunker, designed to protect against artillery and provide interlocking fields of fire, became a death trap when napalm entered through its own firing ports. Training documents from Camp Pendleton in late 1944 described the tactical evolution. Flamethrower employment requires coordination and protection. The operator is vulnerable during approach and while firing. Supporting elements must suppress enemy fire and prevent counterattack. When properly employed, the flamethrower reduces fortified positions that might otherwise require hours of assault and substantial casualties. Time from approach to position neutralization, approximately 45 seconds. 45 seconds. Japanese engineers had designed positions to withstand days or weeks of bombardment. They had not designed them to resist weapons that could enter through firing ports and kill everyone inside in less than a minute. The assault on Iwo Jima commenced February 19, 1945, with the heaviest pre-invasion bombardment delivered in the Pacific War. For 3 days, American naval vessels had fired over 22,000 shells at the island. Aircraft had dropped hundreds of tons of bombs. Commanders assured assault troops that defenses would be destroyed before they reached the beaches. The bombardment had certainly been impressive. Marines approaching in landing craft watched explosions that appeared to obliterate the entire island. Then the craft reached the beach, the ramps dropped, and Marines discovered that Japanese positions remained largely intact. The 72 days of fighting that followed would prove Iwo Jima to be the costliest single battle in Marine Corps history. But within that broader campaign, a tactical revolution was occurring that Japanese defenders could not have anticipated. 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines landed on the island's northern beaches on February 19th. Among their specialized weapons platoons were 3 flamethrower teams equipped with M2 units. Corporal Tony Stein, a veteran of Bougainville and Vella La Vella, carried one of these weapons during the first day's assault. His after-action report, preserved in Marine Corps archives, provides the first detailed American account of M2 employment against Japanese fortifications at Iwo Jima. "We advanced approximately 200 yards from the beach," Stein wrote. "Encountered bunker position, concrete construction with firing port facing our avenue of approach. Port dimensions estimated 8 inches high by 12 inches wide. Machine gun fire from the port had pinned down the 2nd platoon. Supporting arms artillery and naval gunfire had been called. Multiple hits observed on bunker exterior with no apparent effect. Lieutenant ordered a flame assault. Stein's team executed the procedure exactly as trained. 4 riflemen provided suppressive fire, forcing Japanese defenders away from the firing port. The BAR gunner maintained sustained fire directly at the aperture. Under this covering fire, Stein advanced to 30 feet from the bunker. He opened the M2's valve, the igniter sparked, and jellied gasoline roared from the nozzle. Flame entered the port cleanly, Stein continued. Maintained pressure for an estimated 30 seconds. Observed flame projecting from ventilation opening at bunker rear, indicating complete interior saturation. Ceased fire, position silent. No movement observed. Time. From approach to neutralization, approximately 45 seconds. Supporting infantry secured position. 7 enemy dead found inside, overcome by flame and heat. Bunker design and construction would have resisted conventional assault for hours. Flame weapons reduced it in less than 1 minute. This scenario repeated across the battlefield throughout February 19th and 20th. Japanese positions that should have required prolonged combined arms, assault infantry, engineers, tanks, artillery fell to flame attacks measured in seconds. The psychological impact on both American and Japanese forces was immediate and profound. For American Marines, the flamethrower validated months of training and tactical development. Positions that appeared impregnable could be neutralized quickly with acceptable casualties. The weapon that had seemed almost experimental in earlier campaigns had become the primary solution for the central tactical problem: how to kill enemies sheltered in hardened fortifications without sustaining prohibitive friendly losses. For Japanese defenders, the M2 flamethrower represented something their defensive doctrine had never adequately addressed. Sergeant Kiyomi Hirakawa, who survived fighting in Iwo Jima's northern sectors, was captured in March 1945. His interrogation transcript provides rare insight into the Japanese perspective on American flame weapons. "We knew Americans used fire weapons," Hirakawa stated through interpreters. "We had encountered them before. But these were different. The flame reached farther. It did not splash like liquid, but stuck to everything. When it entered our positions, there was no escape. The fire consumed all air. Men who were not burned could not breathe. The heat was so intense that ammunition exploded. In positions designed to protect us from their largest bombs, we died in seconds from weapons carried by single soldiers." The interrogator pressed for details about Japanese defensive preparations. Had commanders anticipated American flame weapons? "We expected them," Hirakawa confirmed. "But we believed our positions were too strong, firing ports too small, positions too deep. We thought Americans would waste their fire weapons against concrete and rock. Instead, they used them with precision. Small teams would approach under cover. Their flame operator would fire directly into ports. Nothing could stop this. No amount of concrete protected us once the flame entered. Asked about the psychological effect, Hirakawa's response revealed the doctrinal collapse occurring in Japanese ranks. We were told to endure American bombardment, then emerge to kill their infantry. We were told our positions made us invincible. The fire weapons destroyed both the positions and our confidence. When flame teams approached, men would sometimes flee before the weapon fired. Death by flame is, there are no words. Some men chose to shoot themselves rather than burn. The interrogation transcript concludes with Hirakawa's assessment of Japanese defensive failures. Our commanders prepared us for American artillery, bombs, tanks. They did not prepare us for weapons that turned our strongest positions into ovens. I believe the generals did not understand what the Americans had developed. If they had known, they would have designed different defenses. But by then it was too late. By February 23rd, 4 days into the battle, patterns had emerged that shocked Japanese commanders still directing operations from deep command bunkers. Radio intercepts translated by American intelligence teams revealed growing panic in Japanese communications. One message from a company commander in the island's central sector to his battalion headquarters read, "American fire weapons are destroying positions faster than we can reinforce them. Request guidance on counter-tactics." The response, intercepted 30 minutes later, demonstrated the doctrinal vacuum Japanese forces faced. Continue resistance according to plan. Use grenades to engage flame weapon operators before they reach effective range. Target soldiers carrying tanks on their backs. This advice reflected tactical thinking from earlier campaigns, when flamethrower operators advanced alone and could be killed before firing. It did not account for the combined arms teams now employed by Marine Corps units. Lieutenant Toshihiko Ono, commanding a reinforced platoon defending positions near Hill 362, attempted to implement these instructions on February 24th. His position, a complex of 3 interconnected bunkers with overlapping fields of fire, had been designed to resist frontal assault indefinitely. American forces had attempted to reduce it with artillery on February 22nd without success. Tank destroyers firing 75mm rounds directly at bunker apertures had achieved nothing beyond cosmetic damage to concrete faces. Then, on the morning of February 24th, a Marine flame assault team approached under covering fire from 2 squads of riflemen and a light machine gun section. Ono's men attempted to engage the team with rifle fire, but suppressive fire from supporting Marines kept Japanese defenders away from firing ports. When Corporal David Bowman reached effective range with his M2 flamethrower, Ono ordered his men to throw grenades. 3 grenades were thrown, all fell short. Bowman opened fire. The napalm jet entered the primary bunker's firing port and filled the interior. Ono and 4 soldiers died within 30 seconds from burns and asphyxiation. The flame travelled through connecting tunnels to the second bunker, killing 3 more defenders who attempted to escape. The third bunker's garrison, hearing screams and seeing smoke, abandoned their position through a rear exit directly into fire from Marine riflemen positioned to cover escape routes. The entire complex, designed to hold for days, fell in approximately 90 seconds. A Japanese corporal who survived by surrendering later described Ono's final moments to interrogators. The lieutenant ordered us to throw grenades. We tried. The Americans were too far away and their covering fire too heavy. Then the flame came. It was like opening a furnace door. The heat hit us before the fire did. Men were screaming. The lieutenant tried to order withdrawal, but his voice stopped. I ran to the rear tunnel. Others were already there, also running. I heard shooting behind me. I kept running. When I reached the surface, I surrendered. Better to be a prisoner than burn. The interrogator noted the soldier's visible distress when describing the flamethrower attack. Subject became agitated when discussing flame weapons. Stated repeatedly that nothing could stop the fire and that concrete meant nothing. When asked if he would have preferred to fight rather than surrender, Subject stated that death in combat was honorable, but death by flame was not death a soldier should face. This psychological dimension, the sheer terror induced by flamethrowers, became as tactically significant as their physical destructiveness. Japanese soldiers, who would fight literally to the death against rifles, machine guns, and artillery, would sometimes surrender or flee when flame teams approached. The weapons struck at fundamental human fear of burning in ways that conventional weapons did not. Marine Corps tactical reports from late February noted this phenomenon with clinical observation. Enemy soldiers who resist conventional weapons with fanatical determination often abandon positions when flamethrowers are employed. On multiple occasions, defenders have surrendered or fled rather than face flame attack. This behavioral change represents a significant tactical advantage beyond the weapon's physical destructive capability. By early March, approximately 2 weeks into the battle, American forces had employed flamethrowers in hundreds of attacks against Japanese positions. The weapon had become the primary tool for reducing fortifications. Marine infantry battalions requested additional flamethrower teams beyond standard allocations. Supply officers struggled to maintain adequate fuel stocks as consumption exceeded pre-battle projections by nearly 40%. Japanese defenders adapted where possible, but their options were limited by the fundamental design of their fortifications. Some positions attempted to create baffled entrances, angles, and turns that would prevent flame from reaching the interior. But these modifications required time and resources that Japanese forces lacked during active combat. Other positions tried to increase the number of firing ports, reasoning that more openings would make precision flame attacks more difficult. This solution merely created more entry points for napalm. The most effective Japanese response was simply to abandon bunker warfare entirely in in favor of caves and tunnel systems where multiple exits allowed rapid evacuation when flame teams approached. But this adaptation came too late for most defensive positions. The bunkers and pillboxes that Japanese engineers had spent 8 months constructing could not be redesigned during battle. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Sergeant Major Sadasue Takai, one of the highest-ranking Japanese soldiers captured alive during the battle, provided post-war testimony that illuminated the strategic failure. Our defensive plan assumed that American infantry would be forced to assault positions directly, suffering heavy casualties. We calculated that Americans lacked the will to sustain such losses. The fire weapons changed this calculation completely. Instead of infantry assaults costing them hundreds of casualties per position, flame teams reduced our strongest bunkers, with minimal American losses. Our plan to bleed them until they withdrew became impossible when they could destroy our positions so efficiently. Takai's testimony continued with technical observations that demonstrated Japanese forces' belated understanding of what they faced. The fire was not like normal flames. It was thick, like liquid, but it did not flow away. When it touched concrete or rock, it stuck there and continued burning. The heat was so intense that metal weapons became too hot to hold. Ammunition cooked off. The fire consumed oxygen so quickly that men suffocated even if flames did not touch them. We had no defense against this weapon. Water did not extinguish it. Our concrete bunkers, which we believed impregnable, became death traps. The mathematical reality bore out Takai's assessment. American casualty rates when assaulting positions with flamethrower support were approximately 60% lower than assaults without flame weapons. A fortified bunker that might require a full platoon assault, 40 men risking their lives in frontal attack, could be neutralized by a flame team of 7 men with drastically reduced risk. The economics of violence shifted decisively in American favor. Japanese commanders recognized this shift but could not effectively respond. General Kuribayashi sent increasingly desperate messages to Tokyo throughout March, requesting anti-aircraft weapons, artillery, reinforcements, anything that might help counter American advantages. But he never specifically requested countermeasures for flamethrowers, because no such countermeasures existed. The weapon exploited fundamental vulnerabilities in fortification design that could not be addressed without completely abandoning the defensive doctrine Kuribayashi had spent months implementing. American tactical innovation accelerated as the battle progressed. By mid-March, Marine units were employing flamethrower tanks, M4 Sherman tanks with the main gun replaced by a flame projector system. These vehicles could approach positions under armor protection and deliver massive volumes of napalm. A single flamethrower tank carried 290 gallons of fuel, enough for 80 sustained bursts. Against Japanese cave systems in Iwo Jima's northern sectors, these tanks proved devastatingly effective. Private First Class Donald Rule, serving with 28th Marines, witnessed flamethrower tank employment against a large cave complex on March 8. The tank moved up to maybe 50 feet from the cave entrance. It looked like a normal Sherman, except the gun was different, shorter and thicker. When it fired, a huge stream of flame shot out, probably 70 or 80 feet. The flame went into the cave mouth, and you could see it light up the whole interior, like looking into a furnace. The tank fired 3 times, maybe 20 seconds each burst. When it stopped, smoke was pouring out of the cave and also from cracks in the rock above it. The heat must have travelled through fissures in the volcanic stone. We waited maybe 5 minutes, then went in with gas masks. Found 23 dead Japanese inside. None were burned directly, the flame hadn't reached that deep into the cave. They'd all suffocated when the fire consumed the oxygen. The flamethrower tank represented the ultimate expression of flame weapon doctrine. Maximum delivery of incendiary material with minimal risk to operators. Japanese forces had no effective counter. Anti-tank weapons might damage the vehicle, but the tank's armor protected it during approach and engagement. By late March, as fighting concentrated in Iwo Jima's northern sectors, where Japanese forces made their final stand, flamethrower tanks became the primary assault weapon. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi's final messages to Tokyo, sent in mid-March before communications were severed, acknowledged the complete failure of Japanese defensive doctrine. Enemy flame weapons have neutralized our fortifications. Positions designed to withstand weeks of bombardment fall in minutes. Our soldiers fight with courage, but courage cannot defeat fire that consumes oxygen and burns at temperatures that melt steel. I deeply regret that our defensive preparations did not account for this American capability. Kuribayashi died in the battle's final days, exact date and circumstances uncertain. His body was never positively identified among the thousands of Japanese dead found in the northern cave complexes. But his tactical assessment proved accurate. The defensive doctrine that Japanese forces had pioneered in response to American firepower superiority, deep fortifications, interconnected positions, willingness to accept high casualties had been systematically dismantled by a weapon that cost approximately $67 to produce and could be operated by soldiers with 1 week of training. The M2 flamethrower that proved so devastating at Iwo Jima represented the culmination of American chemical warfare development that had accelerated dramatically after Pearl Harbor. The weapon's specifications revealed why it succeeded where Japanese defensive doctrine failed. The complete system weighed 68 pounds when fully fueled, heavy, but manageable for a trained soldier. 2 cylindrical fuel tanks, each holding 2 gallons, mounted on a backpack frame. A smaller nitrogen pressure tank provided propellant force. The ignition system used a magnesium friction igniter that sparked reliably even in wet conditions. But the critical component was not the delivery mechanism, it was the fuel itself. Napalm, developed by Harvard chemist Louis Fieser in 1942, consisted of naphthenate and palmitate aluminum salts mixed with gasoline. This combination created a gel with consistency similar to thick syrup that adhered to any surface it contacted. Unlike liquid gasoline, which splashed on impact and could be extinguished with water or sand, napalm stuck to vertical surfaces and continued burning through its entire mass. The gel burned at temperatures between 1800 and 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel and ignite virtually any combustible material. Chemical Warfare Service testing reports from 1943 documented napalm's characteristics with precision that would later prove grimly relevant to Japanese defenders. Upon ignition, napalm gel maintains combustion for approximately 15 to 30 seconds per gallon, depending on surface material and atmospheric conditions. The gel's adhesive properties ensure that it remains in contact with target surfaces during combustion. In enclosed spaces, oxygen consumption creates asphyxiation conditions within 10 to 15 seconds. Secondary effects include generation of carbon monoxide at lethal concentrations and heat sufficient to detonate stored ammunition or fuel. The report continued with observations about tactical employment. Napalm's persistence and adhesive properties make it particularly effective against fortified positions. When projected into bunkers or pillboxes through firing ports or other openings, the gel distributes throughout the interior space and ignites all combustible materials. Personnel within fortifications face impossible conditions: extreme heat, oxygen depletion, toxic gas generation, and risk of ammunition explosion. Escape becomes the only viable response, exposing defenders to small arms fire from supporting infantry. Japanese forces on Iwo Jima encountered exactly these conditions in hundreds of engagements throughout February and March 1945. Corporal Tsunezo Wachi, captured on March 15th after his position was overrun, described the interior experience of a napalm attack with detail that American interrogators found both valuable and disturbing. The flame came through our firing port like water from a hose, but thick and burning. It splashed against the far wall and stuck there, burning. More flame kept coming in, the bunker filled with fire and smoke. I could not breathe. The heat was so intense my skin felt like it was burning even though the flames had not touched me yet. Other soldiers were screaming. One man tried to put out the flames with his coat. The coat caught fire immediately. Another tried to escape through the rear tunnel but fell before reaching it. I do not know if he was burned or could not breathe. I crawled to the tunnel and kept crawling until I reached outside. Americans were waiting there. I surrendered immediately. The interrogator asked Wachi about his unit's preparations for American flame weapons. We were told to defend our positions regardless of enemy weapons. We were told that our concrete bunkers could not be destroyed. We believed this because the American bombardment had not destroyed them. Then the flame weapons came. The concrete did not matter. The walls protected us from shells and bombs, but not from fire that came through our own firing ports. After the first flame attacks, soldiers became afraid. Some men said they would rather die fighting in the open than burn inside a bunker. American production of M2 flamethrowers and napalm fuel accelerated throughout 1944 as the weapon's effectiveness became clear in campaigns across the Pacific. Chemical Warfare Service records indicate that by February 1945, approximately 4,100 M2 units had been delivered to Marine Corps and Army units. Napalm production reached 30 million gallons annually by late 1944, with capacity continuing to expand. The economic disparity was staggering. A flamethrower system cost $67 to manufacture. Napalm cost approximately 23 cents per gallon. Yet these inexpensive weapons could neutralize Japanese fortifications that required weeks of labor and tons of concrete to construct. Lieutenant Colonel Don Robertson, operations officer for the 5th Marine Division at Iwo Jima, compiled statistical analysis of flame weapon employment during the battle. His report, submitted to Marine Corps headquarters in April 1945, quantified the tactical revolution that Japanese defenders had experienced. Flame weapons were employed in an estimated 735 separate attacks against fortified positions during the Iwo Jima operation. Success rate, defined as position neutralized without requiring additional assault methods, exceeded 87%. Average time from flame team approach to position neutralization was 42 seconds. Friendly casualties during flame-supported assaults averaged 1.3 per position, compared to 8.7 casualties per position during assaults without flame support. Robertson's report continued with observations about Japanese defensive adaptations. Enemy forces demonstrated awareness of flame weapon capabilities and attempted various countermeasures. These included targeting flame operators before they reached effective range, constructing baffled entrances to prevent direct flame penetration, and in some cases abandoning positions when flame teams were observed approaching. None of these measures proved consistently effective. The combination of covering fire from supporting infantry, rapid approach, and employment by flame teams, and napalm's ability to penetrate even indirect pathways resulted in continued high success rates throughout the operation. The report's conclusion assessed broader implications. Flame weapons have fundamentally altered the tactical equation for reducing fortified positions. Japanese defensive doctrine, which relies on hardened fortifications to negate American firepower advantages, has been rendered obsolete. Enemy forces can no longer assume that concrete and depth provide protection. Any position with an opening large enough to admit flame becomes vulnerable to rapid neutralization. This represents a decisive shift in Pacific warfare. By mid-March, as fighting on Iwo Jima entered its final phase, Japanese resistance had fragmented into isolated pockets. General Kuribayashi's carefully planned defense in depth had collapsed not primarily through attrition, although casualties were severe, but through systematic destruction of the fortifications that made the defense viable. Flamethrowers had broken the spine of Japanese defensive doctrine. Marine Private Russell McLaughlin, whose unit fought in the final assaults on the island's northern sectors, recorded his observations in letters written in late March. The Japs built incredible positions up here, caves with multiple entrances, concrete bunkers with walls thick enough to stop tank rounds, tunnels connecting everything so they could move around underground. A few weeks ago, attacking this would have meant months of fighting and thousands of casualties. With the flamethrowers, we cleared most of it in days. The flame teams would move up, supported by riflemen and BARs keeping the Japs' heads down. Then they'd shoot flame into the cave or bunker entrance. 30 seconds later, the position would be silent. Sometimes Japs would come running out on fire. Sometimes they'd surrender. Sometimes we'd just find them dead inside when we went in to clear the position. It's terrible to watch, but it saves American lives. That's what matters. McLaughlin's letters also noted the psychological state of Japanese prisoners captured during this phase. The few Japs who surrender are in bad shape mentally. They're terrified of the flamethrowers. One prisoner yesterday kept saying something our interpreter translated as fire death over and over. The interpreter said the Japs consider burning to be the worst possible death. Their fortifications were supposed to protect them, make them invulnerable. Instead, the fortifications trapped them when the flames came. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, though isolated fighting continued for weeks. American casualties totaled 26,000, including nearly 7,000 killed, the only Pacific battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese. But Japanese losses were even more severe. Of approximately 21,000 defenders, only 216 were captured alive. The rest died in their fortifications or in final suicidal attacks. Post-battle assessments by Marine Corps analysts examined the role of flame weapons in achieving victory. Major General Graves Erskine, commanding 3rd Marine Division, stated in his after-action report that, without flame weapons, this operation would have required at least twice as long and resulted in significantly higher friendly casualties. The M2 flamethrower proved to be the single most effective weapon for reducing fortified positions. It enabled small teams to accomplish what previously required company or battalion-level assaults. Japanese survivors' accounts, collected during post-war interrogations, confirmed American assessments. Colonel Tadashi Takaishi, one of the senior officers captured, provided extensive testimony about the battle from Japanese perspective. We knew Americans had flame weapons. We encountered them at Peleliu and other battles. but we did not understand how the Americans had improved these weapons and developed tactics to employ them so effectively. Our defensive plans assumed that even if some positions fell to flame weapons, the Americans would not have enough of these weapons to threaten our entire defensive system. We were wrong. They had hundreds of flamethrowers. Every American assault included flame teams. Our fortifications, which we believed would protect us for months, fell in days. Takaishi's testimony included technical observations about the M2's capabilities. The flame reached much farther than earlier. American fire weapons, 50 meters or more. The fuel did not splash like gasoline but stuck to everything. When it entered a bunker, it was impossible to extinguish. Water had no effect. Trying to smother it with cloth or dirt did not work. The fuel would stick to whatever material you used and continue burning. The heat was so intense that ammunition would explode, killing men who had survived the initial flames. In deep caves where we thought we were safe, the flame would consume all oxygen. Men suffocated without the fire ever touching them. Asked about Japanese countermeasures, Takaishi stated, "We tried everything we could think of. We attempted to shoot flame operators before they reached their weapons range, but American covering fire made this extremely difficult. We constructed barriers inside our positions, hoping to block flame penetration, but the napalm would flow around barriers or stick to them and burn through. Some units tried to seal bunker entrances when flame teams approached, but this trapped defenders inside. We considered flooding some positions with water, but we had very limited water supplies. Ultimately, we found no effective defense. The only option was to abandon positions before flame weapons were employed, but this meant giving up the fortifications we had spent months building. The flamethrowers' psychological impact extended beyond Iwo Jima. As word of the weapon's effectiveness spread through Japanese military communications, defensive doctrine for subsequent operations had to be fundamentally reconsidered. Okinawa, invaded in April 1945, saw Japanese forces employ modified tactics that acknowledged flame weapon capabilities. Rather than constructing bunkers with firing ports that could admit napalm, defenders increasingly relied on deep cave systems with multiple exits, allowing rapid evacuation when flame attacks occurred. But these adaptations came too late and remained insufficient. At Okinawa, American forces employed even more flamethrowers than at Iwo Jima, including additional flamethrower tanks and specialized demolition teams trained to use flame weapons in combination with explosives. Japanese casualties at Okinawa exceeded 100,000, with flame weapons accounting for an estimated 30 to 40% of position neutralizations. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.